Good afternoon and welcome to today's video. So what we're looking at today is the clock and timer module on my Sony C7. As mentioned last week, I wanted to get the module out and to take a look to see if the internal backup battery had done any damage, and also to see if I can actually repair the clock module itself. So what I actually tried to do was to actually get the whole unit repaired, and I'll be honest with you, the results are mixed, let's say. The first thing is I managed to take the battery off, so I started to do that by using some snips to sort of get rid of the battery, so clip the battery off and then sort of twist the battery off. I then used some vinegar. I should have used white vinegar, but I didn't have any white vinegar available, so I just used the standard brown stuff that you got, the malt vinegar. But that was enough to actually sort of clean up the board where the battery had been itself. Now, what I did observe was there was an awful lot of damage to the board, and what seems to have happened is, if you imagine, the damage has actually travelled south, so it's travelled basically down the board rather than up the board. So what has actually happened is it's got onto the ribbon connectors that connect the what I would call the battery board to the clock itself. And what that has done is it's actually damaged beyond repair those ribbon connectors. So what I had to do was actually to remove the ribbon connectors completely. What I tried doing initially was to actually resolder the ribbon connectors, but because they were so far gone, there was unfortunately no way back. So I had to take the ribbon connectors off completely. What I then tried to do was to clean up the old bits of solder, clean up the actual tracks themselves, and then use an unbelievably small drill bit to re-drill the individual holes into the board. And what I noticed on quite a few of the connectors was that the entire board had quite a bit of extensive damage caused by the leaking battery. And what actually happened was some of the tracks had started lifting away from the board itself, and in some cases, when I sanded the tracks to bring them back to copper, so I could basically sort of solder a fly lead onto the track itself, it got rid of some of the actual physical tracks. So what I actually found myself having to do was to actually bridge from the connector on the end of the board to a connector at the top of the board, basically following the board back round, following the track round to the connector at the top of the board. Now that worked okay, and I was able to sort of connect everything back together. But on final reassembly, it actually appeared that all of the work I'd put in, so we're talking about sort of 4 hours worth of work in total, all I was able to do was to get the green LED working and a single dot on the clock. So you could say that the work was a complete waste of time. However, it was very important to get that battery off and to remove any of the remaining alkaline, I think, I'm not sure if it was a lithium battery or not. I don't know how far back lithium batteries go, to be honest with you. But it was very important to clean up the board and get rid of any of the underlying residue from the battery. What I also learnt was the actual board itself, those three boards, come out on a plastic, a little plastic sort of box assembly, and there are two screws holding that box assembly in. So as long as you actually disconnect each connector at the back of that board that you can see to the left, and then you undo the 2 screws at the front. That's literally all that you need to do to get that board out of the machine, to get those series of boards out of the machine. So it would suggest to me that the whole unit is actually sold as, or was sold as, a complete module. So you would basically undo those 2 screws and you would change out the whole unit wholesale, effectively. Now, there was potentially the opportunity to actually buy some new buttons for the timer, but given the fact that I've been unsuccessful in getting the clock working, I'm probably going to leave those. And what I'll actually do is hold out for another C7 clock module itself. You never know, one may turn up, and one may actually sort of allow me to replace the one that I've got. What I actually did discover was you don't need the clock in order for the machine to work. So if you say if the clock falls off due to damage in those ribbon connectors, so long as the ribbon connectors at the top are fine, the clock will, the machine will actually continue to work. You can certainly sort of bring it out of standby, and you can certainly sort of run all of the relevant deck functions, so rewind, fast forward, playback, etc. Now, to make sure that I hadn't caused any sort of long-lasting problems, I did test the machine at the end. There is actually a video of me testing it near the end of this presentation. Now, one thing that I did discover was, and this is something that always annoys me about soldering, is the soldering iron gets oxidised, tip gets oxidised very quickly. So it's sort of almost a sort of a constant battle of using some sandpaper to keep the tip of the soldering iron clean, and also just that sort of little wet pad as well, just to clean the tip of the soldering iron to get rid of any sort of residue that may be on there. You also see I've got a craft knife, or sort of Wix sort of knife in the picture there, and what I use that for is to cut away some of the ends of those little cables. Incidentally, those cables came out of a Hitachi VT11E. They were the right sort of size, and I had a load of them, so it sort of made sense to use them. But what you also need to do as well, because you've got such thin, almost sort of literally microns of space, or millimeters of space between the actual soldered joints, getting that knife blade in between each soldered point is essential, so you can actually get rid of the links between, potentially any links between the solder itself, so any sort of points where it may be bridging, for example. So what I did was I reassembled the unit outside of the machine, and when the unit was reassembled, which was a little bit fiddly, but we did get there eventually, there's literally 1, 2, 3, 4 screws holding all of the parts together. Once it was done, we went on to test.
Well, this particular job has taken pretty much 4 hours to complete, due to the sort of extreme fiddliness of the actual work that has taken place. And it would appear that we have just that flashing on the clock. We do have, though, the LED working, which is good. And let's check deck functions. So it looks like the deck functions still work, so we'll try and play back a cassette in a minute. But we'll get the clock module put in first. Let's just try and move around some of these cables and see if anything else happens on the clock. No, we've got the facility which tells it that it needs to be set. So do clock. That's the problem with these buttons, they tend to sort of die out over the years. It could be because all of these buttons are knackered. But I just have this horrible feeling unfortunately the damage that was done to the board was too much for it, and we unfortunately have a situation where we have a duff clock. However, if you, as it's low current, if you bridge the various connections of your fingers, you do illuminate the clock segments. It tingles a little bit, so I don't want to do that. Which is interesting, actually, as it does seem to suggest that there is power getting to these. I do wonder if it's one of these is not soldered down properly. Just noticed that is. I've moved that away. It's not changing anything. Unfortunately, I think that is as far as I could probably take it. So the other one that isn't working is this one on this side, which is currently dead. So that's line, tuner, camera. So what should happen is that should be illuminated. And unfortunately, it isn't. So what have I learnt from this? Well, a couple of things. The first thing is if you've got one of these batteries actually installed on a board within your VCR, and the VCR is obviously quite old, the best thing to do is to actually remove it and clean up the area. What I've also learnt is when you've got little connections as fiddly as this, with a lot of tracks destroyed or lifting off due to the damage that's been done by the battery, as long as the unit switches on and you can do everything that you need to do, play cassettes, etc., leave it alone, because I don't think I'm going to get that working properly ever again. So I'm going to have to look out for a complete working tuner module, not tuner module, timer module. So yeah, what we'll do is we'll pause the video now, and I'll get this reinstalled. I'm not going to keep recording whilst I'm installing it, because it's something I've done before and videoed before, and we'll see where we are shortly. Oh, missed a episode of Hello Hello, which I've got recorded. It's pretty cool. Anyway, it seems to be working fine, so there's no detrimental effect to from the work that I've done. Let's see how old this is.
She's not for you, she never was. Her coat and no knickers, that's all. Everyone's in a stir. On the up tomorrow.
Oh God, on the up. Takes me back.
A young girl's adolescent feelings and a sinister strain.
Got to be early 90s, judging by that ident.
For the film on BBC Two shortly, starring Laura Dern.
Inside Israel's occupied territories, Palestinians rally for their new hero, Saddam Hussein. But what effect will the outburst of Saddam fever have on the longest and most bitter dispute in the Middle East? That's Saddam's fifth column in Panorama after the news.
Oh, I wonder if we'll get the news. No, let's stop recording at that point. If there's anything else in this tape, because it's quite near the end. No, that was, I think. Oh no, there is something. All creatures great and small.
You might want him.
dear. Well, the good news is, even though my work was in vain, my machine still works. So that's no bad thing. Let's see what we have on the front. So we do have this LED, which we didn't have before. We also have a very bright dot, which would normally you'd have the two dots flashing. You'd have the 0000, and that would flash to sort of denote that it needed to have the clock set. That's but yes, that is pretty much the end of today's video. So that's basically 4 hours of work to get that. But on the plus side, I've taken out something from inside the machine that could have caused me more damage. Anyway, if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, and also consider subscribing for more upcoming fascinating hobbies. Yeah, this is all Creatures Great and Small. Anyway, thank you very much for watching.